Mr. Internet Man, you can't ask me these questions right now. This is for later. It's called The Rite of Spring. And Mr. Internet Man, it was written around the same time as Oh What, if you're curious. Back when I didn't write good songs. According to the internet.
No.
According to the internet, I haven't written. Yeah, fuck the internet.
Welcome to episode 91 of the Hipsters United podcast. My name is Chris, and joining me this week is Alex.
Hello.
And last week, Jason and Susan gave us their thoughts on Oceania, so this week Alex and I will do the same, and as a special bonus, Alex attended the Hot Stove Cool Music benefit concert on Thursday night, so he'll be able to tell us all about that. But let's start out with our thoughts on Oceania now that we've both had a chance to listen. I guess first off, why don't you start out with how you approached the album? What were your expectations going in? And did you listen to it over and over again all the way through, or did you pace yourself? Or how have you experienced the album?
Expectations, very little. I think I had given it very little thought before listening to it. And for listening, as I listened to it, because it was streaming on iTunes, and it actually took me a while to figure out that it was possible to move the time cursor on iTunes and re-listen to a song. I would just listen to it straight through over and over and over again. How about you?
I also I wouldn't say my expectations were really low, but they weren't very high either. I think I was cautiously optimistic, and I knew about moving the slider on iTunes, but my problem is so I sit in front of a computer for 9 hours a day programming at work, but I don't have iTunes and can't install iTunes on my work computer. So as a result, I mean, when I come home, I usually don't spend a lot of time sitting at the computer. So, I mean, really, and Jason and I talk about this frequently about the podcast. Since the very beginning, I've been all about, got to get it in iTunes so people can download it. And Jason's always been all about, we got to have it streaming through the website so that people can listen to it through their website. And I'm always like, well, who would want to sit at their computer and listen to our podcast? But I'm sure a lot of people do that. But it's been frustrating for me that I haven't been able to download and listen to it in my car, since that's where I really want to hear it. But as a result, yeah, I've streamed it probably 5 or 6 times all the way through on iTunes, not right in a row. So I listened to it once the night it came out, and then have kind of paced myself as time goes on. I'll put it on in the background while I'm packing or something like that. But I've tried not to overdose myself on it. Like some people have been crazy. Like, I listened to it 8 times in a row, and it's just been, I can't imagine doing that.
Well, I've listened to it 25 times, so my opinion is going to be much more valid than yours.
Okay. Well, that's good. I'm glad I brought someone on today with some experience in listening to the album. What have your thoughts been on the song so far?
I dig them. I think I agree with Jason, who said last week that it's the best Billy Corgan album since Mary Star of the Sea. I also agree with his retitling of it, where Jason said it's the sonic and emotional ballpark of the album is Mary Star of the Tear Garden Embrace, and I think that is right on. I mean, I think it sounds like the logical progression from those 3 albums. I mean, it makes that Zeitgeist seem like a bit of an outlier with the deep, heavy churning guitars in that album, and it seems sonically right in keeping with what we've been getting since the original breakup of the Pumpkins. But as Jason said, I agree again. I think it's the best parts of all those eras. So while I think Mary Star of the Sea is better, and I think that because those songs are so catchy. I think if this album's lacking in anything, it's maybe lacking in memorable hooks, and that's why I say best since Mary Star of the Sea. But and just in terms of the production is so great. That seems to be the received wisdom, that everyone's loving the production. But it just, as Jason said, I think again, I'm just going to parrot him. It sounds clear. It sounds big. As Susan said, it sounds like a band. I think that's because of Nicole's bass lines, right? I mean, I think that,
absolutely, yeah.
Her presence on the album. So her presence on the album, I think, draws into focus how the extent to which when Billy writes bass lines, he's really just writing the low end of the guitar and building up the low end of the guitar riffs, I think. And we've never before, I don't think, seen these melodic. It's almost like having a jazz bassist or something. That's an exaggeration, but I mean, she's doing a very cool thing with the bass, and I guess we saw that live already. But to hear it on the album is on a Pumpkins album is that's the biggest difference from anything that's come before a Pumpkins album, I think.
Yeah, I remember last week when they were talking about Nicole's bass lines. I was just thinking to myself, yeah, right. How different could the bass
Sure.
really be? It's the bass. It's there, but I really don't ever pay attention to it. But I mean, it really is noticeable, and it really did sound cool.
I think it's fabulous. I mean, I think growing up as listening to the Pumpkins, I think at one point I had more Smashing Pumpkins albums than I had any other albums total. I just mean that when I was 14, most of all I was listening to was the Smashing Pumpkins, and I think it prejudiced me against the bass as an instrument because I mean, when you listen to a Pumpkins album, no one comes away thinking, "Oh, the bass was really great." It just fills out the guitar, and it's very cool to hear this interesting bass on a Pumpkins album.
Yeah, for me, it's funny. The most notable bass work in the Pumpkins history growing up as a kid was the Darcy screwing up the very beginning of There It Goes on the October 5th, 1988 bootleg, which was one of the first bootleg concerts I ever got, like the first show with all
Yeah.
4 band members in it. And if you listen to it at the very beginning, they start out playing There It Goes, and Darcy screws up the bass line. That's like just the start of the show. And that's really the only time I've noticed the bass in the Pumpkins' work up until now.
I think it's not. It doesn't jump out at you at all. I think I mentioned the production. I think the album sounds really great, and I think that's especially true on headphones. So if there's anyone listening who's just been listening on their laptop speaker, I encourage them to put on their headphones and listen again. I'm worried that sounds like a backhanded compliment, or a weak compliment to say that, oh, it's good if you listen to it on headphones. But I guess I do mean it as a partial criticism of the album. I think that we've seen this before with Billy Corgan. I mean, he talks about, just recently he mentioned spending 12 hours a day, every day in the studio working on this. And I wonder if he doesn't have a tendency to lose the forest for the trees a little bit, by which I mean it's fun for him to spend hours and hours tinkering in the studio and making all these layered sounds and putting them together and making it sound great. And the product is great if you're listening in a way that allows you to hear it. And if you're listening on laptop speakers, the majority of my music consumption, I'm sorry to say, is through my laptop speakers. I guess that's, all audiophiles in the audience will cringe listening to it, hearing that. But I think that's true for a lot of people. And I feel like there may have been more attention to making this album sound great than there was to making the songs themselves great. And I'm gonna say in a minute that I like the songs a lot, so I don't mean to say the songs aren't good, but I just wonder if the album pops at you when you're listening to it on headphones because the production is so good and everything sounds so good. And if you're listening to it through tinny speakers, it doesn't jump out at you as well necessarily. I don't know if you think that's right or what your general impressions are.
Yeah, I've completely been listening on. I have a desktop computer. I'm a dinosaur in that regard, and it has, I wouldn't call them nice speakers, but they're the Harman Kardon speakers that Dell computers used to come with like 5 or 8 years ago.
Really? Well, I would think they'd still be better.
Yes, they're definitely better than laptop speakers.
Yeah.
I mean, they are real speakers, and the album sounds fine on them. I think that if I hooked up my Bose noise reduction headphones to it, it would sound a lot better, and I plan on doing that once I get the CD on Tuesday. But I think that's definitely a better experience than listening to it on laptop speakers.
Yeah, maybe you can weigh in the comment section once you listen to it on headphones and see if it changes your impression of the album. Because I think the example I was going to point to is the opening. I guess it sounds like an acoustic guitar strum on pinwheels near the beginning of the song. I was just listening to it on headphones this morning, and I think it sounds so good. And there's a lot on the album that sounds really great. So it'll be interesting to see if you put headphones on this coming weekend and are struck by particular moments or particular songs. But we'll have to see.
So what have been the standout songs for you?
So the standout song is The Celestials. However, and I'm mostly thinking of the moment when the guitar and bass come in. I don't know if it's like halfway through the song. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's a fabulous moment. I think it's an iconic Smashing Pumpkins moment. I feel a little self-conscious about it. So when I watch movies, I think I'm a sucker for, the movies where at the end the kid hits the home run, or the family's reunited, or some like the happy tears moments in movies where everything happens good, and you feel the fuzzy feeling, and I have a tendency to tear up at those moments, which is kind of embarrassing. But and I like to say, oh, it's just that I just get so, I get caught up in the movie, and the emotional climax is so powerful. But I worry that it's actually, I'm just succumbing to trickery, and all any filmmaker needs to do is swell the violins and have people smiling and hugging, and that I it's just, I'm just falling for movie magic or movie trickery, and I'm worried that similarly I'm such a pumpkinhead that, like, oh yeah, we started out soft acoustic, and then the guitars come in, and I the pumpkin fan, I'm just like, oh yeah, it's a music orgasm to my ears. So I'm a little nervous about like how good it actually is, or if it's just like it's catering to my sensibilities. But you seem to agree with me that that's a great moment. So I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, and I think everyone else agrees too. I mean, I've of any moment of the album, it seems like that one has gotten talked about the most. I mean, you hear occasionally people talking about a couple of the other parts, like parts of Oceania, the title track, and things like that.
Mhm.
But universally, it seems like, oh yeah, the part where the guitars come in the Celestials is like the highlight of the album. For
Yeah.
me, the whole run of songs from Panopticon through Violet Rays, like those 3 songs in a row, that's like my favorite part of the album. And I don't know if it's just because I've been listening to it streaming all the way through, and I've gone back, so I'll use the slider and go back and listen to the Celestials on its own, because I really do like that song and things like that. But it just seems like those 3 songs are the ones that at very first listen have hit me the hardest and that I really enjoy the most. Although I do have to give the caveat that when I first bought Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, my favorite song off of that was Love. So
which
take it with a grain of salt.
might be the least mentioned melancholy song. I
Yeah,
mean,
and
no
it's
one
probably
ever.
the most universally disliked. I mean, I think
Oh,
just
really? I would just say
even lately, I've heard a lot of people complaining about how bad it is, and
I,
I would
a lot.
partially agree.
I think there are other songs on well, maybe universal. I would say universally ignored. I think there are other
Yeah.
songs on Melancholy that rub people the wrong way and people get upset about. But Love, no, I just never hear people complain about whatever. I agree with you about Celestials and Violet Rays. I think that's a great sequence. I'm a little bit less taken by Panopticon, but do you not like Quasar? Because I when they were playing these songs live last fall, they would play Quasar and Panopticon back to back, and often I find when loud, rocky, sludgy songs are played live and I don't know them, it's really hard for me to get into them. So I've been not super excited about these two. But I think Quasar rocks, and I think when we think about our reaction to these albums, I think it's interesting to think about the context that we're hearing them in. And Jason mentioned that Quasar is like Astral Planes and Super Christy, and I don't know if he meant that as a compliment, but I would not. I do not take it as a compliment if that's the songs that it sounds like. But I'm just imagining. Imagine it's 1998 and Melancholy has come out. And it's huge, and they have these huge music video hits, and they're touring the world in these arenas. And then there's the end at the beginning. It's the end, which is less successful commercially, but really rocking. I think a lot of people really like that song. Imagine if Quasar had been the next. Oh, Adore's coming out. The new song's getting the radio. Everyone's excited. And Quasar comes out. I think people would have lost their minds. I think that song is pretty catchy, and it rocks really hard. And I think the leads are great. And I think it's killer. But are you less taken by it, and that's why you exclude it from your sequencing of the best 3 songs in a row on the album?
Yeah, I really dislike Quasar.
Oh no! Oh no!
And it's funny because many people I've seen in the thread on the O board and in the comments on Hipsters United have talked about, yeah, Quasar and Panopticon are like the same song, and I can't keep track of them, like keep track of which is which.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like I really dislike Quasar and I really like Panopticon. So it's like I don't understand how people can think that. But
Well, we're the opposite a bit, because I think Panopticon's a little boring. I think Quasar's great. No, I mean, a lot of people agree with you. I've seen people complain about Quasar being boring, and yeah, that's interesting that it polarizes in that way.
and I think
I
part of the reason I dislike Quasar is the religious lyrics. I don't know, it's very in your face, and it's a personal thing. I'm not a religious or spiritual person, as I have discussed many times on the podcast before. So I think that kind of thing just rubs me the wrong way when it's that, out in front of everything.
Sure. I prefer anything that's not love and happiness and not as an abstract concept, but I think that well, let's save it until we get to the next section when we're talking about his progression as an artist, because I have some things to say about the lyrics of the album.
Okay.
I lost what I was gonna say. Quasar. I think there's a little bit of snarl in his voice in Quasar that's missing from the rest of Oceania, and that's another criticism I have is that I think it's like he's lost. He sings kind of high in this album, and often it sounds to me like he's reaching for higher notes in a way that is not super pleasing to the ear. And I miss that Billy Corgan snarl that I think we heard on My Love Is Winter in the live versions, and on Blessed Mother in the live versions, and we heard on Song for a Son in both live and recorded versions, I think. And I'm wondering if it's a calculated choice to not do that anymore and go for this higher. I'm not even sure what to call this type of singing that he's doing. But what do you think about his voice? Do you like the way he's singing in this album?
For the most part, I do. In some cases, it sounds a little cold, but for the most part, I really like the way he sounds. And I think one comment I've seen out there a lot is, like the passion is back in his singing, which
wow,
you could argue that it hasn't been in some of his more recent works, and I would agree with that. I think definitely like in Pale Horse, there's just like a lot of emotion comes through in the way he sings that I haven't. It just hasn't come across to me, except in certain cases. Like I would agree, Song for a Son definitely was. I mean, I have talked many times in this podcast about my love of A Song for a Son, and that has not changed at all.
I don't agree that the passion is back. I think it's maybe this is caught up in the lyrics problems too, but I think it sounds removed and not emotional. It doesn't sound to me like someone who's emoting. It sounds like, oh yeah, I'm just singing these notes.
Really?
I think there are exceptions. I think Quasar has some exceptions, and I think it's hard for me to keep these songs straight, believe it or not, even though I've listened to it so many times in a row. But I think that Pale Horse has some. I think you're right about that. Maybe Pinwheels as well. But think for example, My Love Is Winter is a good example. I think where the live version. I don't want to be one of those people who just like the live version was great and they screwed it up on the album. But listen to the live version of that or Blessed Mother, and it seems like he cares about that when he's singing, I think. And this new up-tempo My Love Is Winter, I'm just not sure the person singing that song cares about what's happening.
I will agree with you on that. Like I don't like the up-tempo My Love Is Winter nearly as much as the ballad I Love Is Winter, for lack of a better term, the original version.
yeah, and I think we've seen not just live. Like I think Song for a Son has this in spades, where it sounds like the man singing is feeling it, and I am not finding a ton of that on Oceania, which is not. I don't mean that as a damning criticism of the album, but in terms of, I guess if there's anything I'm disappointed about, it might be that element. I like the Billy. I mean, I think he's an emotional at his best. His singing is at its best when it's really emotional, and I think that's the classic Pumpkins albums have that. Adore has that. Maybe Adore is a classic Pumpkins album. I don't know. And I think when the albums start to be less impactful on their audience is when the singing becomes a little bit less emotional. But maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe I'm confusing singing higher with less emotion or something. I could be off base here.
So what do you think about the lyrics then? Do I also take it that you don't like the lyrical content of Oceania as much either?
I have not been. I think as a rule, in adulthood, I pay much less attention to lyrics than I did as a teenager. So I was really surprised listening to the podcast last week. Susan had all these ready to go criticisms of the lyrics after listening to it for like a day or something, and I thought, whoa. No, I'm not impressed. I mean, I think that it's this poppy swan, like the ending part now to My Love Is Winter. There is love enough, and love, and it's A of all quite in contrast with his public persona, which we're going to talk about later, and B of all boring, I think. And so I don't know if this is segueing into the next segment about whether he's progressing as an artist, but in terms of his progression as a lyricist, I think I am. I don't think this represents an evolution or an improvement. I think if you zoom out and think about his career, I think we've got some emotional lyrics in certainly Siamese Dream, even Gish. Certainly looking from the original Pumpkin songs like There It Goes and and those old 1988, 89 songs. There's an obvious progression through the early 90s where the songs get better and more poetic. And then in Melancholy, I was trying to remember, there was some quote, I think from Greg Cott in the Chicago Tribune, about the album, the lyrics of the album. It seems like missives from Pumpkin Land or something, like Billy has created this world or this subterranean universe, and he's sending out messages from there. And I think that's right. As you listen to Melancholy, I mean, maybe the acoustics have a lot to do with it, but I think the lyrics create a world that is evocative and engaging. And then I think Adore, the lyrics become more poetic and a lot of beautiful lines in that album. And I guess what I would want is more of that. I mean, I don't know why there's it seems like there should be opportunity for more lyrical. That maybe is redundant or a tautology, but more poetic lyrics. And I find a lot of these lyrics to be a little lazy. Of course, I'm not writing albums, so what do I know? But you feel similarly, or are you?
In general, I agree. So definitely, I've talked about this about a lot of the earlier Teargarden songs that just lyrically they didn't seem up to Billy's standards. With Oceania, I think it's too early for me to really make a decision about the lyrics. I think there are moments and there are like certain little passages and lines, and people have been pointing out some of them in our comments and on the official message board, just like, oh, this is a really great line. And there are definitely like poetic lines and things that I really like, but there's in general, I think I would agree with you that Billy's poetic lyric writing has seemed to really go downhill.
Yeah, and I guess I was trying to think of, so what do I want? Because I'm stopping with Adore in terms of praise. So, but I think I mean, and I'm thinking again of Song for a Son, which I think everyone listens to that and thinks, whoa, it feels like there's some emotional stuff being conveyed here, just not from the music. I mean, well, yes, from the music, but also from the lyrics, which seem to have some obvious relevance to his life. I think Blessed Mother also, simply the title of the song makes your ears perk up and think, oh, what's this going to be about? And contrast that to The Widow Wake My Minds and Astral Planes of the World, and this seems more like the latter than the former, a lot of these songs. But I also am admitting that I haven't really been focusing on the lyrics, so maybe there are these gems throughout the. But even as discussed last week, I Am Special K. I listened, I was like, am I mishearing that? I mean, it seems to be the universal agreement is that's what he's saying, and unless that has some meaning that I'm missing.
Well, it's a drug reference. As someone pointed out in the comments, they were like, you guys do know it's a drug reference, right? And he's not talking about cereal, which, yeah, but it's still cheesy. Like,
yeah, I did not know that, but it doesn't change my distaste for the lyric. It's like the centerpiece of the song.
Yeah.
And for it to be this weird, I don't know. I mean, I don't know when to get too nitpicky, but I guess I just think that there's some blandness in the lyrics that I think when a lot of us think of what is the potential, what is Billy's potential, and he's demonstrated his potential as a songwriter as being, or his potential as a lyricist, I think, as being phenomenally talented, and we do see that even now, but I'm not sure this album represents that necessarily.
And I will say that, I mean, I've probably said a lot more negative stuff about this album than I intended to, and even with the lyrics, historically, when I've listened to Pumpkin's albums, oftentimes the best lyrics and the ones that stick with me the longest don't jump out at me immediately. Like, I mean, Porcelain of the Vast Oceans is one of Billy's most poetic songs lyrically of his career, probably, and that didn't really, strike me for 8 months. So I'm not going to, write this album off lyrically by any means. And if anything, I could say that this album, one of the reasons why I think it's good, and in answering my own question from last week, I think it's Billy's best album since Adore. And one of the reasons is that I want to give it more opportunity to hit me, because it already, just in the 6 or 7 times I've listened to it since Tuesday, like, it's already, as I listen to it, I notice different things, and it seems richer to me than like Zeitgeist, for instance, where there's a lot of songs on there that I listened to them once and thought, I never really want to go back and give that song another chance.
Yeah, to me it stands out among most of the post-2000 output as not having clunkers, which I think the Future Embrace and Zeitgeist and the Teargarden Project do. And you know, I mean, I'm engaged. I'm listening to it over and over again. So it may be a real grower with me, and I'll start to think that I might go back and listen to Adore for the first time in a while, all through, and think, oh gosh, some of these songs are a little bit okay. But I'm not sure. I mean, I think Adore has a lot of variety that this doesn't have, and that's true of also of Melancholy, and it may be hard to compete with those. But you're not saying it's better than Adore. You're just saying it's
No,
better.
I'm saying it's the best so far. It's the best album since Adore in my
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah.
And I will say that even though I say that, there are highs on some of those other albums that I think are higher than any of the highs on this album so far. Like Stand Inside Your Love, the minute I first heard the live version of it, it was like, wow, this is the most perfect pop rock song ever
Yeah,
written.
or the bridge in Eye of the Morning. I think, yeah. I mean, there seems to be universal agreement that, or as you describe it, that the high of this album is that 2 minutes into the Celestials or whatever it is. And when there's universal agreement of what the best moment is, that maybe doesn't speak very highly for how many great moments there are on the album, and maybe it's a solid album. I don't mean to be too negative either. I mean, I think the songwriting is good. This is an album that I want to have on. I enjoy listening to it. I think the Celestials, Quasar, and the Chimera are all super catchy, although I know we disagree about Quasar. I think the closest the album gets to boring is One Diamond, One Heart, which I don't think is boring. I think it sounds cool, and there's enough going on there that my ear is tickled and intrigued the whole time. So I think it's a real accomplishment. I mean, I think it sounds like a band. I think it sounds beautiful, and I give it thumbs up enthusiastically.
Yeah, for me, the only part that's boring right now is the songs later in the album, like Glissandra and Inkless. Like, I couldn't tell you, like, I couldn't hum the melody to you right now or tell you anything about them, even though I've heard them a few times. But I don't. I've seen so many people writing about how great those songs are and how much they like them. I think part of it is I just, because they're near the end, I'm not tempted to, drag the iTunes slider over and listen to them repeatedly like I am with some of the earlier songs. And
Yeah,
and I think they'll grow on me.
Yeah, this happens to me a lot with every album that it takes me a while to get the ending of it. So I'm not too worried. I think that the songs will reach our hearts in time. I had a similar experience though, trying to remember. Like after I'd listened to it a few times, I was riding my bicycle and then I was like, oh, I want to sing some Oceania to myself. What's one of the catchy songs? And the only thing I could think of was Declarations of Faith from Mary Cyrus. So I started singing that to myself instead. But since then, I've become more familiar with the album, and I think there are some real standouts.
If anything, I think that may be a good sign that it's not catchy, because a lot of times the catchiest stuff is the most, disposable.
Right.
It'll go in and out of my head, and then I'll not care about it
I
anymore.
think that's right. I think the Chimera is super catchy. I would also believe that it's the kind of song that in a year I am totally bored with it, and the rest of the album still has nuance and depth that is satisfying. Should we talk about whether it's a progression of him as an artist?
Yeah, so the reaction in the fan community about this album, I think, has been mostly positive, although it has followed the traditional pattern of Smashing Pumpkins fan community response, in that there's about 4 or 5 hours where it's universally praised and everyone loves it, and then after that it starts to get slowly more and more negative, and then, a day or two later, it's like mostly the negative people kind of drowning out the positive people, which is funny because it's been the response to everything ever since the Tarantula single came out. The Tarantula single was exactly the same way, and a lot of the other stuff that Billy's released since then has been exactly the same. I don't know what causes that, but a lot of what I've seen from those who haven't liked it, some have made a kind of a surprising complaint to me that the album didn't represent enough progress as an artist from Billy Corgan. So I'll ask you, what does that statement mean to you? Like, what does progress as an artist mean? And do you think Oceania meets the criteria?
Yeah, I think it is an interesting criticism, and it begs for the person who's putting that criticism out there to explain what they mean. So really should we just be turned back on the original speaker? But there's a couple ways you could go with it. I mean, if we're going to talk about progression as an artist in terms of what I want him to do, Alex, then it's not really because I want. I mean, I think what are the greatest highs of pumpkindom in the past since the Reformation? And I think, as I've mentioned again and again, I think Song for a Son, Blessed Mother, My Love Is Winter are right up there. And I think those are the moments when I'm like, oh yes, I just want to listen to this forever. And the guitars are so good. And I don't know how to describe those songs, but there's some kind of what's the word? Like it's like not anthemic, but there's this transcendently awesome guitar stuff happening
With these swelling guitars.
swelling guitars, yeah, and the awesome leads, and maybe I just am being a poser arena rock fanboy or something, but there's some of that on Oceania, but it's also there's all this up-tempo pop stuff, which is maybe I just don't want that from Billy Corgan, and I think he's good at it, but that's not what I want. So it's not progressing in that way. But I think try to be more objective about it. So I was thinking, well, who is someone who everyone would agree has shown tremendous progression as an artist? So one of Billy's contemporaries, say. And the first person that came to mind for me was Trent Reznor, who's someone who starts out doing this industrial, headbanging, heavy rock, and does that for a while, and is enormously successful at that. And then I think maybe this starts with a downward spiral, but The Fragile comes out in 1998, and I remember people talking about that being Jason's favorite word, epic, and cinematic, and there are lots of songs on that album that are not what one might say are traditional Nine Inch Nails sounding songs. So that's new territory, much like Adore's new territory, much like the Pumpkins' 1990s output. It seems always new territory. He's evolving and doing more and more, and we talked about that a little bit for lyrics already. And then now Trent Reznor is writing the scores for movies, which of course Billy has also done. But I mean, the score for The Social Network and for The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo are phenomenally good. I mean, that is a tremendous accomplishment, I think, to score a movie like that and win the Academy Award for The Social Network, unless I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So that's someone. Trent Reznor, I think, is someone who has demonstrated massive progress as an artist, and we should all be really awed by that, I think. Now, so that's a high standard to compare someone to. And not everyone needs to follow that model. But if we want to talk about someone who unequivocally has demonstrated progress as an artist, I think Trent is the person to talk to. And I haven't thought about who would be someone who unequivocally has not demonstrated progress as an artist, although I did have the misfortune of seeing the new Offspring.
That's a great example.
The Offspring is one of my favorite bands from the 90s and even into the 2000s. They're still putting out pretty good rock music, but that song is not good, and I would not be proud to have written that if it were me, especially after having done the same kind of hokey single fishing that they've done since Pretty Fly for a White Guy.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I have one of my college roommates was a big Offspring fan, so I mean I really liked their the one with Self-Esteem and Come Out and Play on it. They're one that gave them mainstream popularity. Yeah, I really liked that one when it came out. And after that, it seemed to me like the lesson they took from that was, oh well, Come Out and Play was really popular. We need to write more songs like that are gimmicky pop songs.
Mm-hmm.
So then they every single, it seemed like from then on, was this really gimmicky song that I just didn't like, and maybe the other songs in the album weren't like that and were good, but I just couldn't get past the fact that really Pretty Fly for a White Guy, and
so
the rest of their catalog slips my mind now, but it seems like they've degressed as artists.
I don't know about maybe degressing if we think that even the new rock doesn't rock as much as something, but I mean at best they have remained in stasis, and the albums come out and it's there's the gimmicky hit and then there's some rock, and I mean I think there are good riffs on these albums, but there's zero evolution, I think, very close to zero evolution. And so that's an example of someone not progressing. And Billy's not that. It's not like he's just doing the same thing over again. But I don't know. I mean, this seems like, when it just sounds like Mary Star and Future Embrace and Tear Garden, then I'm left to wonder what progress is being made. And it's not like there are fabulous hooks or fabulous leads on this album, I don't think. I mean, it's good and I like it. But I think one I think can fairly say that it's not ambitious in terms of Adore was ambitious and Melancholy was ambitious and Simon's Dream was ambitious, and even Machina I think was ambitious. But what do you think?
Well, I think that first of all, this topic invariably comes up whenever there's a famous artist that releases a follow-up to a really popular album.
Sure.
And to me, I think it's important to not release the same album over and over again, obviously, but it's also important that a band retains the qualities that made them appealing in the first place. And sometimes I think that this is a really lazy criticism that bands get, and they get around it by, having one token dark song or one token acoustic song or one token important song. And personally, when a band I like releases an album that shows too much growth, I often just don't like it. So, I mean, another example from the 90s, I think, was, a band that got this criticism levied upon them a lot was Blink-182, a band that was popular when I was in late high school, early college. I was never really a big fan of theirs, but it always struck me as kind of funny that, they would get criticized for writing these musically simplistic punk songs, or I don't know if you'd really call that punk, like very pop punk songs about teenage relationships, but the criticism is that, they keep doing that. They need to write these really mature rock songs. Like, I mean, yeah, at some point it's a little weird when you have like 30-something-year-old people singing about farting or something, but there's a fine line between growing up with your audience and alienating your audience. And I don't like that natural criticism that, the band has done, they're this great pop punk band. All right, they've done that. They should be a rock band now or something like that, which is a lot of what I hear when I hear people say that, is that the band should totally change their style. And I don't necessarily want that from the Pumpkins. I don't want Billy to, write a country album or something like that, for instance. And I think you're right that this album definitely pulls a lot from his previous work. So, I mean, Mary Star of the Sea, obviously. Future Embrace, not as much, but it's still there. Almost nothing from Zeitgeist, which is kind of funny. But I think that you could also argue that he wasn't successful with those albums where he started trying this stuff out. It's not like he perfected the, electronic pop song with the Future Embrace, and that this is just rehashing the same territory. It seems like he's trying to meld those styles together into something better, which does show growth for me.
Yeah, and you know what? I agree with you. If you zoom into the 2000s, then yes, I think it shows growth and progress as an artist. If you zoom out, then I mean, it's a harder conversation to have because the scope has gotten wide. But that's what I was talking about is more for the past 20 years discussion. Zooming in, I totally agree with you. I also agree with you that it's kind of cheap to say, like, so Green Day puts out these punk albums or whatever they are, and then, oh my gosh, Good Riddance, it's an acoustic song. Oh, that's growth.
They've really changed.
Yeah. So I hear you that that's an easy thing to say, and it's, okay, now you write your big important rock song, and it's almost formulaic in and of itself. But I guess I do think we see, like, think about the Beatles going from I Want to Hold Your Hand to Revolver. I mean, we do see artists grow. Now, maybe we say that Siamese Dream and Melancholy and Adore represent an artist who has grown enormously and who has matured, and to expect continued evolution is a little bit strange because, like, the depth and complicated whatever we want out of our music that it has grown is there. And so it's not like you can just you can just keep climbing up this tree trunk. So that might be right. But it also might just be the case that it's enormously hard to do. I mean, The Fragile, I think, was enormously well received critically in 1998, and that seemed like it was something new, like it was building on Nine Inch Nails. And so maybe this is building on Billy's output from the past 10 years, and I think it has, and I think it's an accomplishment in that respect. But I also don't think that Billy hit the reset button in 2000. I mean, I think it's fair to think about his output as an artist, and I don't know. I think especially lyrically, I'm left a little bit wanting compared to the promise that was shown at some point in the past. But that's also unfair. So it's an interesting conversation, I think.
Yeah, and I think that time will really tell. Like, what kind of lasting impact does this album have? If it has the same type of lasting impact as The Future Embrace, which is almost none, then yeah, you could say that any growth is minimal because he hasn't really accomplished anything with it. But if it is as well received as everyone seems to think it will be, then, I mean, you could say yeah, he's taken what he did unsuccessfully in Mary Star of the Sea and The Future Embrace and kind of bolted that on to the idea of the mid 90s Pumpkins and
Yeah. Well,
gone in a new direction with it.
for a minute, because so I'm curious to know what Billy is hoping for, because he's a number of times said that he talks about if we have this one shot here and one shot to get it right and see if we can connect with an audience here. And there was the reason about the 34-year-old soccer mom who likes good music but is not part of the Pitchfork scene, which I thought was very interesting. But so Billy mentioned when on this what frustrated him about the Zeitgeist tour was they would play songs from Zeitgeist, and I think a lot of those set lists, it's easy to forget now because the 2010 both the reunion tour and the 2010-11 tours have had a lot of old stuff. But there were a lot of Zeitgeist songs being played in 2007 and 2008. Into 2008. And Billy has said that what frustrated him was that they would play these songs and he would look at the audience and there's zero recognition. No one knows the songs. No one cares. It was clear to him they hadn't listened to the album. And I guess maybe they hadn't even purchased the album. And I guess I'm just not sure. So, I mean, maybe this will just explode and sell a million copies, but I don't really think it will. And I think it will be, a modest success, and there will be some rock audience the Pumpkinheads will all listen to it, and some part of the mainstream audience will listen to it. But I'm not sure why we think it's going to be different. I mean, it would have to be so big to reach the average fan who comes to a Smashing Pumpkins show for them to know, Pinwheels when he starts playing it. That just seems to me really unlikely. But maybe I'm just being too much of a pessimist. In thinking that this just has no chance of happening. What do you think is is it possible that he's going to reach this mainstream audience with this album and people still buy albums? I mean, I'm sort of confused. I'm curious. I'm worried it's not even going to sell 100,000 copies. Because do people still buy albums? I do, but
yeah, I don't know. Like the people in my life. So I talked a lot last week about my pool. This is where I talk to the most random people, and and they often play really bad, dance pop music there. And if that is the mainstream audience for music these days, then nothing Billy Corgan does will ever reach them. These are people that like LMFAO.
Right.
Nothing on this album is going to reach them, and if Billy did reach them, I would not be a fan of the Smashing Pumpkins anymore because
this would be
awful.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it seems right to say that there was a period of time, or maybe a long period of time, but certainly in the 90s when mainstream rock was mainstream. And I'm just not sure that's really true. I mean, I think there are things that are referred to as mainstream rock, but the average person, what exposure do they have? Like, the Foo Fighters came out with an album, and I didn't hear a song from it. I mean, I attended to seek it out because I was curious, the one they did in the garage or whatever with Butch Vig, I think. There's just, like, if you go to, walking through in a store or commercials or just the places that people hear music now, it's all about pop and dance music, I think. And there's
what is a popular rock song now? Would you call that Gautier song Somebody I Used to Know? Is that a rock song?
Or I'm not going to come up with it. We Are Young. There's a song. The chorus is We Are Young. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
That sounds like a rock song to me, and I've heard that on the radio, by which I mean in establishments where they play the radio. But I don't know. I just think it's a different world, and so I think he should be after some kind of like Nine Inch Nails, Radiohead, Flaming Lips, Fish style model of the core fan base. I think but of course that's what I want because I'm a core fan.
Yeah, and he said he's definitely not after that. Which is, right. That's how the Pumpkins have always been. They've always been about trying to go after the mainstream crowd. Right. It just doesn't seem like there is much of a mainstream rock crowd anymore. Most rock fans are into their little insular indie bands.
The mainstream rock crowd is the indie Pitchfork crowd. Those are the people who like rock music, I think. And people who aren't into that aren't following rock. Like, I'm not into that. I like the Smashing Pumpkins and some of the bands that are from the 90s that I still like. Garbage has a new album coming out. I'm very excited about that because I'm clearly just a 90s rockhead. And besides that, I actually like the mainstream pop music that's out now. And maybe that's just because I'm exposed to it. And I don't. The Pitchfork world to me seems insular and unwelcoming and snobbish and snarky and negative. And so I'm not really interested in finding a place for me in that world. And so I like the mainstream pop. I think that's interesting and catchy, and I like thinking about pop hooks and what makes them catchy. And then besides that, there's a certain universe of alternative or old school alternative rock that I like. But I don't know. I just don't know that the audience is there. But maybe I'm wrong. I mean, people have comebacks, and I'm talking about the album not being ambitious. It's certainly ambitious to try to become a mainstream hit artist again, and so props for that. For
I mean,
sure.
would you call Muse a popular mainstream rock act?
Well, yeah, I guess they have to be because they play the Wembley Stadium show, which is the DVD is so great. Yeah, and I mean U2. Like, I mean, there are huge band. The White Stripes are recent enough, I think, to call a huge rock band. Well, what about I hate this band. Not Coldplay, but well, they're also huge. Kings of Leon. Kings of Leon. Who perplex me. This is a great example. Kings of Leon, I think, are huge, right? And or at least I remember 3 years ago that they seemed huge, or 2 years ago. And I was really perplexed because that music is so boring. I think it's so nothing different about it compared to what was happening in the 90s. It's so bland, and yet it's hit among, like, for me, rap music. I don't get it. I just used air quotes even though no one can see me. I don't get it, but I get that young people like it because it's the new thing, and this hip hop infused all this stuff. It's like, okay, cool, we're moving in some direction here. And Kings of Leon is so boring and bland, and it blows my mind that kids like it. I would think kids would be like, this is like my dad's music. This sucks. But kids like it. So if there clearly is an audience for this kind of stuff, and if that's what it plays after, great.
It's just going to be, I think, a lot more difficult than it was before. So, I mean, I think you're right. That is really ambitious if that's what he's trying to hit with this, which by all accounts, it sounds like it is.
Yeah.
Well, you didn't get to go on the boat the other day and hear Jesus is the Sun, but why don't you tell us about Hot Stove Cool Music?
It was a very long show. There were 4 openers, starting at 7, and it went till midnight. Maybe 8 till midnight. I can't remember. But I was very nervous that the crowd was going to lose interest and be grumpy by the time the Pumpkins took the stage. It seemed like it didn't happen. I don't know what the mood was as the Pumpkins took the stage, but people didn't seem anxious during the setup bands, which were pretty lively for the most part and played pretty tight sets. No one really overstayed their welcome. And then I think the Pumpkins did the right thing, which was they played like 6 out of their 7 hit singles for this audience. I think everything except Disarm got played. That's exactly what this $50 a ticket charity audience wanted. The median age was, I think, easily 40. That was what people wanted. That's what they heard. The band sounded, I thought, the same. The thing I thought was most striking as a serious fan, I saw some people complaining in the comments that, I'm tired of hearing these hits again. But I don't think that's right. I think the hits are worth playing. And it's 2 years now that this foursome has been together, right?
Yep.
And that's kind of cool. And we've been missing that sort of longevity for a while in the band. And I don't think they sounded. I mean, I thought they sounded great in 2010. I don't think they sound better now. I think they still sound great. It's very cool to see that. I feel connected to Jeff, who's been around for 4 years or 5 years.
Yeah, it seems like he's been around forever.
Yeah, I mean, he's basically James, right? At some point, he'll have been in the band longer than James. That'll be a trip. Well, man, if that day comes.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're great. They're great. The band is great. I've been saying they're great live on the podcast before. I think most people agree. I don't think anyone really complains about the live show. Maybe some people miss Jamie Chamberlain, which is understandable. I think the only other impression I have is that it was there was a funny vibe, at least around my area in the audience, which was near the front. I had not looked at the set list very closely for the previous shows in Portugal and Spain because I didn't want it to be ruined, predicting that might be similar. But when they just kept playing hit after hit and Starla, and then the song in particular that people were looking around with their hands on their heads like, can you believe it, was Muzzle. It just seemed like everyone really was happy. And I think I can't imagine leaving that show unhappy. I brought a friend of mine to the Riviera show last October in Chicago, and he hated it, and I don't know why, but it was the case that I think they only played 2 of their hits that show. I for a hardcore fan, the show was great, and Billy recently said that in an interview, it might have been the Greg Cott interview, that Riviera show in October was one of the warmest crowds he'd ever played in front of, and I think that's right, because everyone there presumably is some kind of Smashing Pumpkins fan, and they played some real crowd pleasers beyond the hits. But it's hard for me to imagine anyone leaving the show not smiling, and so I think they did a great job. But did you have impressions seeing the comments or anything?
I guess I was very surprised that they only played 2 songs from Oceania, but considering the length of the show, it makes sense. I mean, it was not the typical, 2.5 hour epic Pumpkins show.
Yeah, it's a shorter set. I'm curious what's going to happen. I guess there's some thought they're going to do a fall U.S. tour, and maybe some thought they're going to play a lot more from Oceania. And I mean, the album.
Well, Billy has been saying they're going to play the whole album all the way through to start out the show.
Yeah, I
mean, waiting for that to happen, and none of the shows that they've played so far really would lead.
I just don't know. I mean, so I guess if the album takes off, then fine. But it's okay. So it's September, and the album came out 3 months ago, and we're just playing it. I just think there has to be room for integrating new and old in a way that is pleasing to an audience and not alienating. I'm just nervous that that's not going to go well if it's just 12 new songs in a row. But
yeah, and this show was definitely not the venue for it. So
of course.
The history of this concert, they've been doing these for a few years. This is the first year they've done it in Chicago because it's always been run by, I guess, Peter Gammons and Theo Epstein. So Theo Epstein used to be the general manager of my own Boston Red Sox, and now he's the GM of the Chicago Cubs. So now that he's in Chicago, I guess the concert moved with him out of Boston to Chicago.
I just don't know. Like you say, that this was not the venue for playing Oceania straight through, but I'm not sure what is the venue. I mean, I think maybe the Boat, that would have been a good venue to play Oceania straight through, or like a really intimate show, like with 200 people or something.
Or if you promote the show as a night, like a night with Oceania or something like that.
Yeah, no, sure. But I mean, if they're going to be doing the same thing they've been doing for a couple of years, which is playing 1,000, 1,200 person venues, I just think that a lot of people come to those who aren't going to have listened to the album, and I guess if the point is to sell them on it, then okay. But I could just imagine well, I don't know. The press has been really. Jason correctly predicted that the reviews of this are coming out are really positive. So the reviews of those shows might also be, there's this new album and it's great, and they played it just like the old days when they would play Adore almost straight through on tour or Machina. And see, we've maybe gotten a little spoiled in the past few years with all these deep cuts being played for the first time live in 10 years, and we all go crazy.
Right, the Boat actually was the ultimate, where they played Bleed for the first time since 1989, and Jesus is the Sun for the first time ever, Luna for the first time since 94.
Yeah. So should we move to the final topic?
Yeah, so now that Oceania is streaming and will be released for sale this week, promotion has finally ramped up on it after what I think a lot of people thought would happen a little bit earlier. So there's posters hanging up in urban areas, the Celestials is getting some radio play, and Billy's saying inflammatory things in interviews. So first off, in an interview with Anti-Quiet, Billy claimed he would piss on Radiohead, referring to his dislike of what he called their pomposity. But the bigger story this week was Billy in a long interview with NME referring to James Iha as a piece of shit and one of the worst human beings I've ever met in my life. Now, as is usually the case when Billy says something negative about a former friend or bandmate, a conversation erupted amongst the fan community, and some fans actually defended Billy, saying that this was Billy reaching a breaking point after months or years of James needling him with lawsuits behind the scenes. But, it strikes me as a really big coincidence that Billy seems to reach these breaking points so often when there's something to promote and he wants wider attention. In an interview later in the week with Greg Kot that we've talked about quite a bit already, Billy admitted that the antagonism between he and the crowd during the 20th anniversary tour was, him being in character like wrestling. And it just seems like his, snarling pre-release interviews where he rips on other bands and former bandmates are, him playing the same character. What do you think?
So can we split up him ripping on former bandmates and ripping on other bands?
Sure.
Because ripping on other bands does seem very much in keeping with him being the pro wrestling heel and saying inflammatory things to get people to turn and boo and argue and get upset. And I think your point about the timing of all these outbursts is pretty good. And it gives me pause about what my normal position is on the stuff about former bandmates, which is that I think it is just about as classless as it gets. I think James Iha has taken the high road this whole time. You may remember the Tinted Windows interview from maybe 3 or 4 years ago where the guy's like, I know I shouldn't ask you this, but are you going to join the Smashing Pumpkins again? And James is like, I'm not really here to talk about that. Billy's really talented. I wish him the best. And that's so classy. Just move on, right? And for Billy to be digging up, and I mean that, I think it just is repulsive, I think. And that's why I'm skeptical that it's deliberate, because it seems too consistent with the sad pattern that we've seen, which is it seems like all of these professional relationships end terribly. There's a motorcycle behind me. I apologize. From James to Darcy to Jimmy to Carrie Brown, even it's now that relationship turns poisonous in some way. It seems, and that just seems to be a consistent pattern of I don't know poison that leads me to. I don't think that's a deliberate character move. I think that's a problem in his life. And when this stuff comes out, it just seems like there's something unbalanced going on. I mean, I'm not a psychologist or whatever. I don't know what I'm talking about, but I just find it sad when these things get brought up in public in this, to my eye, very distasteful way. And I don't think it's a deliberate thing. I think it's something that's less deliberate and sadder. How about you?
So my argument that it's deliberate, I think Billy's a very, introspective person. He's dealt with the media, he's been in the public spotlight and been a public figure for, 20 years now, maybe a little bit less. He's had a lot of experience dealing with the media. He's a fan of wrestling, and he's, clearly studied the idea of self-promotion. And it just doesn't seem to me that, he would carefully craft his image and do all this stuff that we may think is strange, but clearly he's doing it on purpose, wearing the dresses on stage in concerts and yelling at the fans about stuff and things like that he's clearly doing intentionally. And then someone asks him a question about, what do you think of James Iha? And it all just goes out the window, and he's like, I can't control myself anymore. James is a dick. It just seems like that's just more of him playing this role of, I'm going to say these things that it's not like that. I'm sure that he thinks these things are true. I don't think he's making them up. I don't think that secretly behind the scenes, him and James are like best friends or something.
No,
and that in public, he's pretending James is a jerk. But I think it'd be very easy for him if he thought that the best course of events was not to talk about James Iha. I'm sure someone could say, what's your relationship with your former bandmates? And he could say, well, I don't really talk to Jimmy, and actually, I really don't have a relationship with any of them right now, which would be true, and it'd be a totally non-inflammatory and much more classy thing to say, but it also wouldn't get him nearly the attention that saying James Iha is a piece of shit does. And really, what does that hurt at this point? It's not like anyone's, people don't decide to listen to music based on, oh, Billy was mad at his former bandmate, so, I don't like him, I'm not going to buy his album. It just gets him attention, and further sullies any relationship he could ever possibly have with James Iha in the future. But at this point, I'm sure Billy is kind of written off ever having a relationship with him or ever wanting to have a relationship with him. So I really do think that he's doing it on purpose, and that he does it more so on purpose when he has something to promote. So, I mean, Billy's been interviewed by people pretty consistently, whether it be at shows or at South by Southwest. He hasn't said boo about James Iha. And now all of a sudden he has an album coming out, and James Iha is a piece of shit and the worst human being he's ever met in his life.
Okay, I mean, you convinced me, and I think let me give you a data point to support your argument, which is I remember reading an interview. I don't know how long ago this was. This might have been from the 90s actually. And Billy says something like, there's one part of my life that I refuse to make part of the public record, and that's my marriage.
Right.
And I think that he's followed through with that. I mean, I say we broadly, and maybe there are super inside fans who know more than I do, but I don't know anything about that. And if it's the case that he is unable to contain himself and control himself from running his mouth off about grievances that he has, then one would expect that would have been brought up at some point.
Yeah, you'd think of anyone for Billy Corgan to be mad at, I mean, not now, but 15 years ago, 10 years ago, it would be his recently ex-wife.
Right. So that's a pretty good data point, I think, to support your theory that this is much more calculated and controlled than I'm giving credit for. And I think especially, we hear nothing about James. Oh, there's a new album coming out. I mean, that's pretty good. I think I cede my original position. I think that you've convinced me about this.
And his thing about his ripping other bands, I don't think that says. I don't think he saves that for releasing albums. I mean, he's talked about that fairly regularly. And I should say that a lot's been made about, he's going to piss on Radiohead, and, he has this feud with Radiohead. And I think that's kind of an exaggeration. I think he's, mostly mad at the pitchfork system and the idea of propping up these indie rock bands as like, they can do no wrong. And like the pomposity that he said is very appropriate. Like there is just this pompous air about, everything they do is so important. It's not that the music is good, but it's just important.
No, I think the wrestling heel analogy is all you need. Like he's got to be the antagonist. And when I say gotta, I mean he works that way. Like that is how Billy Corgan has always worked as a public figure. And it would be simplistic to say that or it would be wrong to say that that's unintentional. It's clearly some measure of deliberate.
And if it gets more attention for Oceania, and if there's people out there that, oh yeah, Billy Corgan ripping on his bandmates, oh he has a new album out, I should check it out. If that does happen and people like the album, fantastic. I mean, I think it's a good album, and any way to get it attention is good,
yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I mean, when I was searching Twitter, just searching Smashing Pumpkins and various similar search terms to try to find people who were going to the Metro show to put on the Twitter list. I mean, there's tons of seemingly random people being like, oh wow, Pumpkins have a new album, I'm going to take a listen. So there's clearly some exposure, and we'll see what kind of sales it gets. I'd love to know the streaming numbers and how many people are paying attention even now. They have some prominent placement on iTunes, etc.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've been really impressed with that aspect of the promotion. Like they being put on the the banner ad at the top of iTunes for a week is the equivalent of in the late 90s, having a big cardboard standee of Billy Corgan at the front of Best Buy where when you walk in he's there, and having the album playing over the speakers. Like it's everyone buys their music there. It's a huge promotional opportunity.
And for sure he's right about, he realized that song by song it's just not happening, and that the traditional or semi-traditional promotional promotional outlets or whatever still work, and they work better when you have an album.
I mean, just look at the sticker on the album. It says first full-length Smashing Pumpkins album in 5 years. I mean, There's some currency in the fact that you don't release something all the time, and that, this is really something special and you should pay attention to it.
Yeah, I remember on Sound Opinions with Greg Kot and Jim DeRogatis, and this was probably in 2003 or 4, they debated whether we're soon to see the death of the album, and I think maybe Greg Kot argued that we were going to, and that we were going to enter the singles universe. Which one of them argued that we're going to see just singles, and it'll be like, I guess the old days, like in, I don't know, the 40s, or people would just put out songs. The concept of the album really rose alongside the increasing record player ownership, I guess. 10 years later, I mean, that seems wrong. I mean, pop music trades in singles for sure, but we have Exhibit A, they're putting out songs, no one cares. Album, people care, even if they only listen to maybe the single. It's still necessary, it seems, to have an album behind people still take that seriously in a way that they've always done.
And I think that's a relic of rock music overall. Like, it seems that all rock music, mainstream or indie rock, is still like that. It's still very much album focused, whereas I don't claim to know much of anything about hip hop, but it really seems like the hip hop world is also one of singles, that people will just release a song randomly and it'll get a lot of attention.
That might be true, but it does. I don't know. Lil Wayne comes out. It does seem to me that you hear about albums in the hip hop world in a way that my limited access to it in a way that you don't for I don't think people get excited about Katy Perry's new album. But people get excited about Katy Perry and Beyonce's new song, or Rihanna's song. And hip-hop maybe is somewhere in between, or maybe it's more like the song thing too. But I think you're right, the indie world's definitely about albums. People get like, new album coming. You still hear that all the time on Pitchfork and that kind of stuff. Yeah, so we'll see.
Yep. Well, thanks for joining us this week. Our closing song is Bleed from the deck of the Odyssey Chicago on June 12th, 2012. Good night, everybody.
9th, 1987. So we're almost at the exact 25-year anniversary, so I think that's pretty cool. And so I thought it'd be cool to play a song that was actually played at the first Smashing Pumpkins show. The joke that will never die from the fan that will. This is a song called Bleed. sing. You can watch me leave. Daylight comes and washes over me. What you ever wanted. This is not your cross to bear. And there's someone beside you. What they want isn't what they say. Failing in your eyes was more than I could take. It's all I could see. You can watch me leave. Settle your belief inside of me. Feeling in your eyes was more than I could take. Feeling in your eyes was more than I could take. 1 and 2 is 3. Feeling in your eyes. Feeling in your eyes. Feeling in your eyes.
Podcast is not affiliated with or endorsed by the Smashing Pumpkins, Virgin Records, or Warner Brothers Reprise Records. All opinions offered by panelists or guests of the Hipsters United podcast are their own and do not represent the opinions of the Smashing Pumpkins. All audio during the show is licensed for non-profit use per the terms and conditions on the Live Music Archive at archive.org. Intro music is from the Machina 2 album released for free download on the internet by the Smashing Pumpkins in September of 2000.